to our midweek podcast, something we felt like would be helpful for our church and anybody that watches us online to occasionally come midweek and talk about something that maybe it's a series, maybe it's something that's happening at the church, kind of like a Cornerstone Inside. And so here I have with me today, I have David Watkins, our worship leader. Welcome, David. And we
hold on. This is great because we can't coin worship leader anymore.
That's right, because it has actually been
trademarked.
It's been trademarked. So our hymnologist David Watkins, and then we also have our communications director Stacy. So if you read anything of ours, newsletter or anything that looks pretty, it probably comes from Stacy. Yeah. And so just the three of us, we kind of form what we call the creative team, and we get together each week and we talk about series and things that are coming up. And so the series that we are just finishing is the whole series called Act Like Men. Pastor Artie, just this past Sunday, finished up the last week of that series with a sermon titled Good Man. But, there's just so much that goes into making a series like this. And just to give you guys online there a window into maybe even the mindset of how a sermon series comes about. Generally, how that happens is that we've been talking amongst ourselves, or even just in my time of prayer and study, just something, the Lord lays something on your heart. And in this case, it has definitely just been the cultural narrative, I would just say kind of against men. And I know that's a broad statement. There's a whole lot that can be said there and a whole lot of even disagreement there. But ultimately, just toxic masculinity. What does it look like? What is a good man? What is a godly man? What does the Bible has to say about masculinity? And what's really interesting, I don't know how you guys kind of see, but there have been so many other pastors and churches over the last 2 years, which is really helpful even in my own study, that have been doing series just like this, whatever it's called, Be a Man, manhood, biblical manhood, all these kind of stuff like that. Have y'all seen anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really important now in the world today to really capture what it means to be a man, because the man is the leader, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and you started off with that in the sermon series. What is a man? Where did the man come from? What is his purpose?
Yeah, what a bold question in 2023.
It really was. What is a man? Yeah.
Careful, we might get canceled.
It might get canceled on our podcast.
Before we even begin.
First episode. Never made it big.
What a way to make it out the gate.
Yeah. And I tell you, there are so many wonderful pastors out there who are front line of this thing. I tell you, one is Dr. Tony Evans, who I grew up hearing. Dr. Tony Evans and the Alternative View. Just even hearing that my dad had a radio in his work place or whatever, and he just always used to hear that on Dr. Tony Evans on 89.7 WMHK back in the day. Anyway, but he's done a lot of this work over the years, and even some of this stuff. Matter of fact, that very first, because I gave reference to him, that in the very first series, and I just think that's so powerful that if you want to change the world, change a continent, continent change a country, country change a state, state change a city, city change a neighborhood, neighborhood change a family. If you want to change a family, you change a father. And he'd said that, years and years ago, I think at a men's conference, and there had been stuff in our past, like Promise Keepers was a thing back in maybe the early 2000s,
Did you
late
do
90s.
That?
I went to one, and the reason I remember it wasn't because of Promise Keepers, but because of whoever booked it. It was actually with Cornerstone. I was probably 15, 16 with my dad. We stayed in the sketchiest hotel I had ever stayed. But it wasn't like what my dad had booked. It was whoever booked the trip. And one of them, I believe it was Pastor Chris. In his room, we were pretty sure there was a bullet hole in the wall. Oh, no. It was just, I don't know. Somebody was like, what's the cheapest one, and book it.
It's men, right?
It's a bunch of men. It's like, I think I would have rather camped outside in the yard than in the sketchy. It was like one of those where you just you take the comforter off and you sleep on top of the sheets in your clothes.
It was just a test. Basically, it was testing your manhood.
I don't know what
all this leading up to.
I don't know what Promise Keepers was about, but I do remember the terrible hotels. Yeah. That's all I can remember. But he taught, I don't know if he taught it that one. But anyway, so, just talking about this whole thing with manhood. So was there anything in y'all's mind that really even kind of jumped out? And I guess even that first sermon, we talked about what is a man, what a man is not. I just really like some of that. And again, some of that just came from my study of hearing other guys clarify that in really good ways. Like, man, that's really powerful to think of it that way. Like, a man is not a boy. What is that difference? We kind of live in a generation of perpetual boyhood, perpetual selfishness and entitlement. And
Yeah, I think that, in that first sermon, you shared a good bit of statistics that really stood out to me, specifically just about fatherlessness. And those are all on the website, by the way, in the notes.
Yeah,
but
a lot of songs on the notes.
About 71%, I'm looking at it right
plug.
now. Yeah, that's right. 71% of inmates and 81% of rapists come from fatherless homes, and 90% of homeless and runaway children, fatherless homes, 60% youth suicide. I mean, it continues to go on. And you said, typically we try to, how did you say this? You said something like, typically we try to prove stuff with scripture, but really it's awesome when you see
we see outside
real world statistics
matching. Because sometimes it feels far away. Like, of course you're supposed to say that, preacher man. This is your job to say that the Bible is true. But then all of a sudden, culture proves the Bible to be true. Like, oh, well, maybe we should have known that already. Yeah. And I thought that a lot of that was really powerful, just in finding some of that stuff, and honestly, very, very humbling. I think. I mean, I grew up in church. I think all of us grew up in church, and I don't distinctly remember. There was an expectation, obviously, of what being a good father was, or at least that dad's supposed to be present. But just speaking back into the cultural narrative, I hate that it has taken so much of this to happen in our culture that now all of a sudden we have these incredibly high statistics, and now the church is in a way playing catch up. Like, oh man, maybe we should have been talking about this stuff the whole time.
Right.
The foundation, the family is the foundation of society. And I just feel like as a person, even outside of just being a pastor, as a person, man, I just find myself being more pro-family, pro-marriage, pro-fatherhood. And I'm not saying that, being a good father, you have to chase your kids around to every day. Like, that's not what being a good father is, it's certainly presence is a part of that, being available to your kids, being around them, being involved with them, but also setting boundaries, telling them no. Some of the best things my parents ever told me was no.
Absolutely. Well, see, and that narrative has changed so much now, because you remember back when we grew up, I mean, it was, when you think about what is a man, back when we were kids, we were 6, 7 years old, we think about all the things that outdoorsmen, big burly guys, and now that narrative is not there anymore. And so it's interesting to see that, not just from a biblical standpoint, but from an in the world view. And what society is trying to tell my kids now, what a man should be and what a man should not be doing.
Yeah. And I think it's a good example of because one of the better. Just remember distinctly listen to a specific pastor talking about, when he started his series on manhood, it's like, listen, I'm not trying to say that you need to be out there like splitting wood. And it's like, I don't even like that stuff. And it's what's so funny is, man, I just grew up, my dad is, I guess if you want to take that, the manliest man I can think of. He's so strong. He's the guy that you want with you in the apocalypse. Like, he's just one of those guys. I'm going to say, you probably don't want me, but he's the guy you want on your team. And I just think, like, I'm glad. I mean, I certainly have picked up traits, and he's trained me really, really well. And, there are things, man, I just never feel like I'll be as good as, but that's not the essence of manhood. That's just a segment in that. And you're right. I do think we have actually gotten better at that as a culture, where you don't have to be some hairy chested, lumberjack guy. Like, no, you can be all sorts of things in society, but what is the essence of that? Well, essence of men, they're builders. They build things. They're protectors. They protect things. They're providers. Kind of get into this still. So whether you work at an IT company, whether you do work out on the rail yards, it doesn't matter. Like, these are the essence of the things, and how you just express that out is just going to be specific to you and your talents and what you're good at and things like that.
I also like how you I don't remember which sermon it was, but you pointed out, a lot of the times you hear, well, I didn't have a father. You were talking about your dad, the manly man.
Yeah.
But also you hear, well, I didn't have a father to teach me how to be a man or how to be a godly man. I didn't. Or you have single moms who don't have a father figure for their children. And you automatically want to say, well, I don't stand a chance, right? But that's not the case.
Yeah.
Because you can be that chain breaker. You can begin by seeing a difference in the next generation of your family.
Yeah, being the change you want
I
to
don't
see.
remember what sermon that was.
Well, there was one we taught. This, and again, not an original idea to me. I knew it was a thing, and because I talk about my parents a lot, and they were these people. But a guy titled, I forget his name now, called a transitional character, and I just feel like that's so powerful because you see that in Scripture a lot too. You know, I think the one that immediately comes to mind is Moses is one. I mean, Moses. I'm sorry, not Moses. Abraham. Getting my own Bible characters confused. But Abraham. So Abraham was just, God says, listen, I need you to leave your family, like step out, and what I'm doing in you is going to be different. But he had to be called out from his family. So if you're going to put that into like a perspective of somebody's life, I don't think it necessarily means we all need to move away from our family. I don't think that's the purpose there. But there are things that we need to move away from in which we have been handed. And a lot of that back then certainly was going to be locationally. And the gods that they served were going to be locationally, you know, based on, you know, the local deities or whatever of that region and all that stuff. And God was calling Abraham out. And I think he does that with each of us, like calling us out of those comfortable spaces, things that maybe we just don't think about, but we should because it's how we've always done it. And I definitely think like manhood and masculinity, like toxic masculinity, if you want to talk about that, you know, there are versions of that absolutely where, you know, it's overpowering or it's abusive or it's, you know, it's just harsh or it's unloving, you know, these classic kind of traits that you want to, you know, these negative sides of masculinity. And those things are traded down. Like why do sons of alcoholics become alcoholics sometimes? It's like, man, that is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And that is, in a sense, a generational sin, but it can be broken, you know? So, man, my dad never said I loved you. Well, make sure you tell your son or your daughter,
yeah.
I love you every day. Like, you know, break the pattern. I hate that for you, but that's life, you know? I mean, it's just life for all of us. We can all look back and kind of play the victim a little bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of times there's going to be one of the two extremes, you know, with the alcoholism thing. You're either going to, typically, you're going to want to fall into that or you're going to want to stray as far away from that as you can.
Yeah. So anyway, so we finished that series, we finished that sermon. Then we went on to, and Stacey, you actually really both of you guys, because y'all are in two separate growth tracks. And so if you are new to the Cornerstone experience, growth tracks are relatively new. They're classes, even some may say a version of Sunday school, but we're not going to call them that because I hate the word school because I was not good at it. But growth tracks are temporary classes centered around a topic. And so both of you guys are in a growth track called Kingdom Marriage that is run by the great Wayne and Trina Murphy. And that's been a really strong growth track for us for the last year or so. Stacey, you have started a new one called Becoming a Biblical Woman because it isn't all about the guys.
That's right.
The guys do need a whole bunch of help. But the Bible has a lot to say on both of those things. And so in conjunction with that, we talked about in week 2 of the Act Like Men series, talked about men and marriage. And one of the things I didn't start with is the line, and I will have to say, because I just always want to be honest, I kind of formed this by listening to some people. And so this wasn't a completely total my own idea, but the line of the series was, when men step into their purpose, everything flourishes. And when they refuse, everything burns.
Insert dramatic effect.
I can't get any deeper. Burns. Anyway, so
post-production will help.
Post-production will do that. So this is the unfiltered. So we talk about men in marriage. You know, one of the bigger reels that we'd ever had put on social media on Instagram was the clip talk about that marriage is not a prison.
Yeah.
Marriage is not a prison. And you know what?
Who would have thought?
Apparently a lot of people are like, of course, what was so funny on
Let
that?
me listen to this.
What was so really funny is I saw so many people sharing that, like tagging other people. And I'm like,
don't tag your husband.
I'm just
Are
curious.
you placing blame?
I just really want to know the background of this. It's like, who is sending this to their spouse? Or maybe it's a bunch of moms to their kids. Like, see, honey, I told you, go get married. It's not a prison.
There you go.
The pastor says so. You know, but I mean, I feel like.
Or like girlfriends. Like sending it, see, if you marry me, you won't be living in a prison. The pastor said that.
Do you think, Stacy, is that a narrative, this whole prison narrative? Because I would actually say the reason I thought of that is because I have very much heard that type of language within like men speak, you know, how men get together, again, old ball and chain. Is that something that happens in the female circle? Is that something you would have experienced?
No, I think it's a little bit different because I think that men, which I don't know, I mean, I'm not a man, but I think men think that because they hear about what you spoke about the old ball and chain, right?
Yeah.
You spoke about that kind of phrase being placed on women. So therefore, I think women in marriages feel like, well, I have to push him. I have to push him to do this. And I need him to do this. And he doesn't listen to me. And he doesn't do this. And so then like women are kind of looked at as we are constantly just bickering and forcing our husbands to do things, right?
The nagging wife.
That's
The
where they're
nagging wife. That's right.
Yeah,
and so,
that's the stereotype.
and I think that really comes along with just the marriage has been shaken up, and the women we've come out of order. You know, like the male is not leading anymore. The woman feels like she has to lead. And so therefore there's that conversation amongst men, right? Well,
now
this is
she's
a prison. She's forcing me.
She's forcing me.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I maybe hadn't quite put it into that thought pattern, but I think as you're talking, you know, the phrase that I've referenced in one or maybe even several of these is, you know, Scripture says in Genesis, you know, and a man will leave his father and mother, and will cleave to his wife, and they'll become one flesh. And I think when you look at that pattern, and I've heard this taught for so many years, you know, it always actually starts in that case with the man. The man is to go and leave his family. You know, in a sense, it's even this picture of the man goes and finds his wife. And I know sometimes it's like, well, that's just old stereotypes of old systems of people or whatever like that. But in reality, I mean, I think that's kind of how it's always happened throughout the generations, really, up until maybe the modern era. And I don't think we've quite gotten it right. But now the women are actually the one out there doing the fishing, trying to find them a man, trying to capture them a man. And so now the narrative has shifted to where it's like, man, the dudes are out there trying to escape. And I was like, how backwards is that?
It's almost like you're being hunted.
Yeah, like
right?
you're being hunted by these females are going to come and trick you in. It's like, but what's so sad about that? That is completely opposite of the order of the way God designed the world and the family to work, where, you know, the man is supposed to go out and make a way. I think that's really what that's really trying to state. A man will leave his father and mother. What does that mean? He is leaving home. He is going out to be the provider, the protector, you know. And 1,000 years ago, it might would have been finding his own cave. But today it is getting a job, getting out of the house. I think it kind of goes back to
establishment.
Establishment, there we go. And stopping that perpetual man or boyhood. That is just so...
The mother's basement.
Because here's what's ironic. This is always unfiltered, by the way. Whoever's watching or listening to this, we are not held liable to anything that is said on the Cornerstone Insider podcast. But if you think about this, what's so really ironic? And looking at just at boys for a second, because I know there's a whole conversation we had about daughters and stuff too. But a lot of times, the statistics are showing that fatherlessness is sky high, right? So that means that the mothers are raising the boys, but it's actually the mothers raising the boys at the cost of the next generation of mothers, because the mothers are keeping their boys much longer than fathers typically keep their sons before turning them into men.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to show the terrible pattern. And I can see that like in my own family, whether it's my own experience as a child or even with my kids. I mean, the fact is I have to be careful not to be too harsh, you know, make them do, oh, you're fine, get up, it's just a little bit of blood. And you know, what does a mama do? Traditionally, of course, a mama wants to swoop in like the mama bird and cover them with their wing.
She's
and of course,
the nurturer.
Yeah, and I think that you need both, though.
Yeah.
And not that a father shouldn't never be nurturing. Absolutely. I think fathers need to be that. And I think moms need to toughen up a little bit. Unless you have a mom that's a nurse. I think moms that are nurses are some of the most hardcore people. Like, it's just the bone sticking out of your arm. Get over it.
You'll be fine.
My sister-in-law.
Yeah. I saw that this morning. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Your sister-in-law's the thing.
Man, that's the thing. Is there blood? No, you're good.
You're fine.
You
You're
know?
fine.
Is a limb hanging off? It's all good.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. You don't need to rush to the emergency room.
No.
You know, saw a gunshot wound this morning. You're not that bad off.
Well, I do really want to recommend to any of the women that are listening, like, don't be caught off guard by this sermon series being titled "Act Like a Man." You know,
Yeah.
don't think that there's not something that you can get from this, because as a woman, like, you need, if you are a single woman, you need to know what to look for in a godly man. And if you are a mother, like, I'm a mom of boys. I want to know how to raise my sons to be
Yeah.
godly men,
Yeah.
because they're going to get married one day, you know.
Yeah.
Or if you are a mom of girls, you need to teach her what to look for in a godly man. So there's so many reasons for women to understand what a godly man looks like.
What it actually looks like, yeah. And because I think it can almost be said, as a parent, one of the goals, and maybe it's because we've gotten it backwards in how we raise our kids. Like, I really do believe that one of the highest aims for a person, and this is where I would start going against kind of the current cultural narrative, is not to go and be successful in a career, because I have done far too many funerals of successful people whose family was not at their funeral. You know, that just happens all the time. And I'm not saying that always happens, but I'm just saying that it happens enough that success cannot be equated as the ultimate top tier of the pyramid. And I've also been to some funerals of some of the, honestly, poorest people, or people just with not a whole lot of influence. But man, their family missed them.
Just an outpouring of.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, man, you could tell grandmama or granddaddy, man, they were just a pillar in that family. And so I do believe, with the Bible informing kind of my way of life, that family is one of the highest aims and achievable things. That's what God built. Everything else is actually in support of, like, yes, go work hard, be successful, build a career. Well, why? Not so you can abandon your family, not even so you can take them to Disney World, but no, so you can help nurture them, build generational wealth. Like, I believe in all that great stuff, but it's still for the family. And so I think what is so sad is that instead of preparing our kids for that ultimate aim of how to be a good husband, like, man, I think that's a conversation we need to be having with our boys. And that can happen whether it's mom and dad, or even just mom.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what mom needs to do, is like, listen, I'm going to train you to be the husband, and I wouldn't maybe say it this way, but the husband that I never had.
Yeah.
You know, and again, not vindictively, you know, and making him,
Or even like the husband, the man, the leader that God designed you to be.
Yeah, that's a better way to
know?
put that. Maybe not that I've ever had. That's a better way to do that. Yeah, that's a better way. Because otherwise it'd be like, your husband, your dad was a loser. And
Don't be like him.
Everything, you're going to be everything that he's not. I mean, you know. But I think that's a challenge, though, for a lot of single moms.
How much of that happens?
How much of that happens?
Yeah,
you know?
definitely.
You know, it's a reactionary thing. And I think that's, again, where even if you're a single mom in a situation like that, there is still so much wisdom that can be gleaned both from Scripture, but also being in Christian community to help balance those things out. Because I'm sure there's a wounding there. Like, no doubt. Having to take on that burden alone, that is something that uniquely often falls to women. That is part of our broken society. And even though that's difficult, that's why you need to have positive people. And honestly, I hate to say it, it probably isn't a bunch of other single, hurt, or divorced moms.
Yeah. I was just going to say that. I know in our growth track, you know, I was speaking with a single mom the other day, and when we were talking about the order of God's design for family, she admitted that she struggled with that only because her heart had been hardened towards men because of what happened to her. And so therefore it was a struggle for her to teach her children what that looked like, because she didn't want to have anything to do with it. You know, I mean, she was already hardened. She was hardened towards that. And so her instruction was more of like what you were saying, like, you don't want to be like him, go the opposite way. He's terrible. But in reality, we still have to submit to God's order and really pray not to be bitter about what we've gone through.
No, I think that is really difficult to do. And I'm going to say something that I feel like is unique to the church, where we are called to evaluate our hurt, both in the light of who Jesus is and what he has done for us, because that's a very powerful thing, but also how that hurt can then be leveraged.
Yes.
Because this is probably something that we need to teach better. Like, your hurt will be used in your life. It will either be used for further destruction or it will be used for progress. And the Christian message is that God takes our hurt and he actually then, in this miraculous way, can equip that to be the foundation of our very ministry.
That's right.
You know, I mean, there's just
purpose.
Man, so much purpose in that. I think it's just that's a beautiful portion of the gospel beyond even just I'm saved. My soul is saved for eternity.
That's
no,
right.
like even in this life now, God begins to kind of build in these pockets of heaven, these pockets of healing in the midst of our broken. I mean, so how many times even though this is dark, but man, somebody has been molested, somebody has, been abandoned or whatever like that. And that actually is the foundation of what God uses.
That's right.
To then heal untold hundreds and thousands of others.
Yeah.
And, I think the same can happen in a microcosm of the family, whatever that hurt is, maybe for the mom or the dad. I know there's dads out there raising kids too, even though it's a smaller percentage, but same thing of not rebounding so far, but raising them in light of. So why don't y'all speak a little bit while we're on the marriage and family?
I was going to say, I had a question. So Dustin, you asked Stacy about the kind of in the women group, if that whole, being the ball and chain, does that affect the way of thinking? But I wanted to take it the opposite way. Does having that in mind, can that be a thing where it's like women are like, oh, well, I don't want to be labeled that, so I'm going to be as loose as I can. Not like, wrong context, y'all. As free willing for my husband, and then that then creates problems.
Yeah.
Is that something that is talked about or is a concern of women, of married women?
Yeah, I think so. Only because I'm coming from the viewpoint of, biblical women are biblically told to submit, right? And I think a lot of the time that gets a bad rap because they think, kind of like what you're saying, I should just lay down, right? I should just let him do whatever. Yeah. He's the leader, but that's not biblical submission. It's just not. And so I think, like you said, it could go one way. It could go like, she just lets him do whatever he wants. She lets him make but we are called to be helpers, biblical women. We are to help. I mean, it says in Genesis 2, I think, it was not good. He needed a helper. Adam needed a helper. And so he created a helper in Eve. And so what that means, and I think you even spoke about this, Dustin, is, like as a wife, you come alongside him. What did you say? You face to face? Didn't you say that? Like it's not, a lot we're taught to do side by side.
So that actually came from a book. It's a pastor, Mark Driscoll, came from, I think it's called Love and Marriage. And I was reading through that in preparation, and I just felt that it was one of the best analogies of how, in the marriage context, you can be back to back, which means you are facing away. You're against each other, basically. I mean, you don't, not a positive back to back like in a battlefield scenario. Where you are not facing each other. You are not putting each other before yourself. Because I definitely think one of the best ways to look at marriage is, I've heard it said it's a submission competition, because obviously the submission comes in part for the women, and that's kind of what Paul talks about. But you always have to go up 2 or 3 verses, and I think it's in Corinthians when he says that. He says, by submitting to one another.
Like outdo one another.
Yeah, outdo one another in a sense in your submission. And, and I think that's what's, like, it's almost like a race. It's a race of, who can submit and serve. And of course, man, our terminology around submit is just so...
Yeah.
It just comes with so much cultural baggage now. I think sometimes I wish there was a better way to highlight that. But anyway, but within that, what I was talking about was back to back, shoulder to shoulder. I think that is very common in our American culture.
Yeah.
Where we're walking with one another,
side by side,
which also was reference to the second most popular clip that we had on Instagram, which was this. But I think, again, it just speaks to so many of us as couples, You get married. It's love. And of course, not just kids, but kids and careers come along. We're busy. You are building together, and that slowly you kind of start to turn outward and you're walking forward. But I think if I were to take that analogy further, once you are no longer facing to each other and you're facing out, even though you're together, it is more easy for your eye to be drawn off course, whether that's just your own needs and desires, whether that's your own, lack of fulfillment in some areas, distractions and things. And again, it might not be an affair distraction, but it certainly could be, your work becomes your second spouse.
Or children.
Children
I mean,
can.
as much of a blessing they are.
Yeah.
they can cause some serious things in a marriage, right?
That was one of the things when me and Amber got married and started. That's my father-in-law and mother-in-law. They had always told us, they had heard of a couple who raised their kids. Everything's great. Kids got grown, moved out. They looked at each other and said, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
And that is, too often the case.
Yeah.
And so you have to be intentional about that not being the case.
Yeah. And you really actually hear that a lot, but I will say personally, and I can't judge this. This is totally my own opinion. Or I can't prove this, but I do feel that is more of a common phenomenon, meaning in the last 40 to 50 years. And it's not just because of like women in the workplace. It's not that. I think what happened is two things happened at the same time, is that women joined the workforce, in a very high percentage, and a culture of almost child worship kind of came alongside of it. And I feel the tension. I'm just being honest as a parent. I feel the tension of where to draw the line of how involved our kids should be in things without being judged by other parents, because it's like they do this, they do this, they do this, they do this, they do this. And it's all like, I want my kids to experience all these things. It's like, am I just that selfish that I'm just like, no thanks.
Yeah.
I don't know how y'all feel. I mean, because we all got kids at the same age. It was like, am I just doing this so nobody judges me?
Well, it's become the norm.
Yeah.
It's become the norm to be busy.
Yeah, to be very busy. And honestly, like when it happens, I mean, when you're both working, I mean, kids with school and homework, sports, like who practically has
then
time?
a proper bedtime as well.
Proper bedtime.
And baths. Like, who has the time to bathe anymore?
Chores?
I mean, chores?
Jeez. But
Once
seriously,
a week, we go down to the river and just
There you
wash
go.
them, just throw them in and get their bath.
Or the pool.
And one of the things that we've struggled with this, is because on a positive side too, because it isn't just even busy. I think that's part of it. But even when we go out, because again, it's so natural to kind of do shoulder to shoulder. And I'm actually going to say, I think a lot of us as couples at times are walking shoulder to shoulder. The way you get back to face is by having that appropriate time, that set aside time, whatever that is. But I know that with Allison and I, there have been times when we would go on vacation or we would go off or even for a day. And it's like the whole time we're like, oh man, if the kids were here, they would love it. Man, I would love to bring the kids back here. It's like, wait, it's like, what did we talk about before the kids? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but we were married for like 4 years before kids showed up. So it wasn't like there was not a relationship and, all of a sudden there were like kids immediately there. It's like, no, we had tons of time.
Yeah.
Who were those people? Where did they go?
I don't know.
How long were you and Drew married before y'all had kids?
Well, we were only married for a year and a half. But
y'all have been dating.
We dated for a
since
very
y'all
long
were
time.
toddlers.
Pretty much. High school toddlers.
High school. And actually same thing with you and Amber.
Yeah.
High school toddlers. That's what I feel like sometimes I look back. It's like, God, I was such a child.
Yeah. We dated for a very long time.
And so.
But I swear when we got married, I still, even though we dated for so long, and maybe, you both dated your spouses for a long time, but even like the first year of marriage, we were like, who is this person?
Who is this person?
I mean, because marriage is so different
No,
from
it is very different.
dating. It is so different. I think that's important to speak about too. Just because you dated somebody for such a long time, marriage is different from dating. Like it's these two. You're actually rubbing up against each other's badness, right? Your sins and the ugliness, and two imperfect people together, and that's when real life happens.
Is when real life happens. And I mean, it is intense because I would say like the love is really intense because you're young and I mean, it's just what you've been wanting to do. And so it's just, everything's intense. Everything's so intense. I do look back at that compared to now. And of course, having kids is certainly intense, but in a way, like things are just less intense because you figured it out. We've been married for, this year will be 13 years. It's like, man, at this point, we've also been married. Isn't that crazy? We're almost getting to the point where we will be married almost as long. Not so much you and Amber. Y'all are the newer out of the three of us. How long y'all been married?
11 years.
Whoa, I take it
11
back.
years this year.
Man. So never mind. So we're all kind of on the same path then. So it's like in a few more years, we will be married longer than we were at home.
Yeah. Well, so Drew and I have been together. That's what we figured this year.
You've actually been together
This year,
longer.
we have been together longer than. How does that work? I'm trying to think now. We've been together longer
Then you lived at home.
than I lived at home. Yes.
Which is funny because I mean those years are obviously so, formative because patterns and your habits and how you think about things and all that stuff like that. And so then you're shoving two people together. Of course, then they got to pave that way forward. I would say one of the things that me and Allison never struggled with though was the little nitpicky stuff necessarily. I don't know if that comes down to couples or. I don't know. Like you hear that classic thing. Maybe I don't know if y'all ever like fight about the toothpaste and stuff. You hear people do.
So I do have a story.
I'll go for it.
He's gonna love that I shared this on this podcast. I always share it.
Yeah.
I share it because it's important to know for young married couples. So Drew and I did date for a very long time, but the first year we got married was really tough because we were just figuring each other out. We came from two different homes, two different lifestyles, two different kinds of marriages. Our parents, both sides of our parents just were different. And Drew would have to leave for work really early. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking like at that point it was like 5, which was early for us.
That's still
as
very
20-some-year-old people, right? So I, as the newly married wife, wanted to make his lunch for him, right? I wanted to do that. And so we would go to Kroger and I would go to the deli and I would get meat sliced for him. And y'all know the little bags that deli meat comes in, and it's got this little zipper, and typically it just breaks. It doesn't really work, right? Well, I made him a sandwich. It wasn't like an elaborate lunch, but I made him a sandwich and I put it back in the fridge, but I did not zip it up. And so the next morning when I was getting ready I got up super early so his lunch would be ready, and then he left. And when I was getting ready for work, I saw this note on the lunch meat inside the refrigerator.
Uh-huh.
And it said, "Next time you use the lunch meat, please close the bag."
That thing stung, didn't it?
That
like
was
a
probably
fiery arrow to the heart.
That was probably our first fight as a married
Drew, how dare
Drew, you monster.
I remember he called me multiple times throughout the day and I just did not answer. I was like ghosting him, right? And then when I got home, he was like, "I tried to get in touch with you. I was so worried about you today." And I was like, "Oh, were you? Were you worried
Were you
about
worried
me?
about me? Were you worried about
Were you worried about the sandwich meat?"
That is so funny.
Yeah.
That is so funny. That is a true life story.
There you
That
go.
is such a true life story. That is really funny.
But I will say, I wanted to bring this up because this really spoke. I know it spoke with Drew, and it probably spoke to a lot of husbands. But you mentioned loving their mother well. How to be in the Good Father series. I think you mentioned loving their mother well because they're watching, and it teaches kids that marriage is foundation. You were talking about that, and I think that's so important. Only because it's not important for your children, but that really speaks volumes to the wife. Mm-hmm. You're putting her first. Your desire is to please her and love her, and that's important to you. And so when your wife sees that, when a godly woman sees that, she's going to want to submit to you as the leader of that family.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just kind of closing on the marriage side of things, I just feel like what the Lord kept bringing to my mind and spirit as I was studying for this is if we were to take away a lot of the cultural garbage and baggage that we have, a lot of us been trained into. This is a very American way, a very Western way. All these different kind of movements that we're just products of, the sexual revolution, the feminist revolutions, all of these things that have just happened over the last, let's say 60 to 80 years that have gotten the family where it is now. If you look back at Scripture, what you see are two distinct creations of God made to complement one another.
Yeah.
And in their roles, man, things really do thrive. And one of the most powerful thing about women is I think that's what's actually gets kind of missed out on the whole even submission conversation is that the secret to a great man is a loving wife who recognizes what God has called her to do and be in the family and in the marriage. And so in a way, the women actually hold so much power in the family. And that's what the Genesis account kind of shows, that both of them, the man disregarded his role, she disregarded her role, and literally ever since then, every married couple has had to basically question, are we going to follow the way of Adam and Eve, our ancestors, or are we going to step back into the roles and back into this complementary system of living in which we support each other in the way that God has designed us? And again, that does not mean that the woman doesn't work or, that the dad doesn't take care of the kids. Like all of that stuff isn't there, but it's knowing what part do I play. Not that I'm just called to, but literally what I have been created to do. And I think that's a much stronger thing. Like a hammer is always going to be best when it's used as a hammer, not as a shovel, not as a weapon, but as a hammer, as it was intended. And I just think that's just such a powerful way to look at that. And it maybe often gets missed. And there's just so much in the Genesis account, man. So many of our problems can be pointed there.
First three chapters,
man. It basically wraps up all of humans' problems. Yep. That's why the Bible is so powerful. And then the third we kind of touched on some of this. We talked about fatherhood. I just obviously think again, man, dads can really make or break a family. And it's not to say that the moms can't either. Absolutely. It's just that the statistics show that men are much more likely to abdicate that responsibility. And of course, that doesn't mean that dad's leaving the family behind. I think there are a lot of, if I were to go deeper on this, there are a lot of families who the dad is present, but he's not present. They're still in a sense fatherless in emotion and even spiritual leading. I think anytime I think about this, it's just the way in which moms and wives generally are having to beg or drag or force or argue husbands to church, husbands to lead them spiritually. And it's just not the way it's supposed to be. Not the way that God designed it. It's just that's part of the fall. Adam does nothing, Eve does everything, and then somehow or another, it all falls apart. And so just think that's
well, that was one of the main things when we were going over this series is you were pointing it all back to the fact that the man, Adam negated his role. He gave up his role.
Yeah.
And then allow, everything else from there, because everybody always wants to point it back to, oh, Eve did this, Eve did that, and she did. But Adam fell off on his role. So it is a shared,
What is the scripture? In Genesis, it says he was with her.
He was
right?
with her.
He was with her.
Because I've heard over the years, not saying this is a common thing, but man, Eve really ruined it for us. Like, nope. I think what's actually powerful about the Genesis, if I really dig into that, is neither party gets to claim innocence. Neither party does. Neither party does. And I think actually one of the biggest things from man, anyways, I can't judge this from a woman's perspective because I think that's why even both genders need to come to those stories and see what God is trying to speak back out to humanity in that story. Is it's not even just the fact that he was there with her, and he obviously, like, why was he not in between her and the snake?
Yeah.
Why did he not get in between her there? Which is such a powerful, beautiful look at how Jesus is the second Adam, and he does. He stands in between us and the snake. You know, that is why we follow him, and now we're sons of God and not just sons of Adam. But the fact that when God came to the garden and started asking, it's always the next step in the relationship. It's always the shifting the blame game. What has happened? And God speaks to who first? He speaks to Adam first. And what does Adam say? Not that I messed up. Please forgive me. I allowed this to happen. No, what does he do? He's like, it's this woman you gave me. It was both God and the woman's fault. It was both of their faults, not Adam's. And it's like, there you go. There you go. Adam's the first dude to say, I'm innocent here, bro. I did nothing. And God's like, exactly. That's the problem with this whole thing. You did nothing. And I think that's just, that's why, again, man, we have to rage against those things as men or as women, and of course, she blames it on the snake, but like neither one of them took responsibility, because I can't prove this theology. I have no clue what would happen, but what would have happened if in that moment repentance took place? I don't know. Maybe all of this still would have had to go. Maybe they still would have had to, been, excommunicated out of the garden. But what if, what if Adam was like, yes, I stood by and watched, and I neglected the authority that you gave me. How do I make this right? It's me, not her, because it's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus comes in as the innocent one and says, no, it's on me, not them. And so what if he would have been that there? I don't know. I don't know either.
I did have a conversation about that with my oldest son, and he's so wise, I feel like, beyond his years.
Little sage.
He is. And he said, but would I have ever needed Jesus?
That's a good question.
Would that dependence had ever been there? He didn't use those words, but in his 10-year-old vocabulary.
But he's picking up on something there. He's trying to work it out.
Yeah.
Because I think it's helpful sometimes to kind of play those what ifs. I mean, we have to live obviously in reality. But the what ifs help paint a picture forward even for us. What if I don't follow in the pathway of Adam and I follow in the pathway of Jesus even for my own life? Because what's going to come natural is I'm going to shift blame. I'm going to stand by. Because that's the problem. Men, when they stand by, when they advocate responsibility, they then have the out of, it wasn't me. Because in a way, he wasn't fully wrong. Yeah. It was the woman. Yeah. She took the fruit. Yeah. She could have said no. But why didn't he? That's always what's missed in the conversation. Well, why didn't you say no? Yeah. It was his job. God actually never, that's what's really interesting. In that passage, the first time that God ever spoke to the woman was actually in that conversation. Everything had always been to the man. That's and it was the man who was, Adam named Eve, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Like it was Adam's responsibility to, in a sense, kind of be the priest of his home, which is still the standard now. And instead of being the priest, bearing the responsibilities, like, it was her fault. Yeah. So I just think that's a powerful, powerful lesson.
Well, too, I know that, so this past session in Becoming a Biblical Woman, we talked about contentment. And so then again, we went back to Genesis, and Eve was the first human that was not content with the role that God gave her. She wanted more. The enemy allowed her to think that he was withholding from her, and so I think it's just that lie in humanity. Like, you deserve more. There's more for you. Don't be content. And so they stepped outside of their roles. Adam, responsible, right? Responsibility from the moment he was created. He was responsible of so much. But he wanted to give that all up.
He did. He wanted to give it all up.
He wanted to give that all up.
That would be a good series title. Same lies.
Ooh,
talking about the same lies, because I think that's what's so the enemy is not creative. He's not creative, and there's a purpose in that because only God is creative. And when you're separated from the source of God, your creativity stops. And so he uses the same lies throughout the millennia. He's just really good at telling them. That's the biggest thing. He's really good about telling them and slightly shifting them a little bit. That's always what he does. He shifts the truth. He pairs it with some truth to tell a really sneaky lie.
He makes it look so good, too.
Makes it look so
He's
good.
not going to give you, he's not going to say, hey, here's all this baggage and this that's going to come, and I'm going to promise you this. He makes it look like there's nothing.
Yeah.
And you're going to have everything,
No,
It's this shiny little trinket that he offers.
And I think the thing, we can't go that long here, and even the message, hopefully this will be something we could work out later, maybe in a different growth track or something. I think the biggest thing with this series, if I were to speak to women and not men, because really this was a call out to men, is what advice, what encouragement, what direction to give to, I guess, the moms and the wives in the various scenarios, because you may have the single mom, and I think we've all tried to, just throughout the series and even in your growth track, trying to point single moms into some good advice, what to do, how to leverage the church. But what about that mom that she's like, listen, I've tried all of these things, and that's a really tough place to be, where you are having to be the leader. And if I had to speak to that in the moment right now, I would say that there are a lot of blessed sons and daughters in the world who mom stuck in there. She made the marriage work. She took those kids to church. I definitely think in those moments, what you have to think about is you were playing a longer game than what the world tries to tell you. The world is so here and now. If it doesn't make you feel good now, stop doing it. If your marriage isn't making you happy now, find somebody else. And what we don't realize is the consequence and the devastation that causes from that. Of, I understand how difficult it may be, but how sticking in there, how loving your husband in a godly manner, even demonstrating that I made a commitment, so I'm going to withhold that before the Lord kind of idea, how powerful that is to children. Because really, otherwise, we kind of live in the generation we do now where nothing matters except for my own personal happiness. Nothing matters except for what I'm feeling right now. There's no longevity to anything. If you step out of line, or if you mess up, if you're not making me happy or whatever, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to abandon you. That's not the story of the Bible at all. So I know it's a tough place to be, if there's somebody out there struggling in that, and, just know that the Lord sees that, man. I think back of Hagar. The Lord did not abandon her in the desert, did not abandon her, even though she was actually a victim in that situation. She was a victim in that situation. God did not abandon her. And God saw her.
And I would say, in scripture, there's a lot of women that are like that. If you read through there,
that is true.
There's so many stories of what was it, Dinah? Is that right? Dinah, who was a sister and daughter, Jacob's daughter. Am I getting my?
Oh, geez. We should know this.
I think it was remember. Dinah. I think that was her name.
Let's say yes.
And she was Jacob's daughter, and this is dark, but she was raped.
Yeah.
And then her brother, there are so many stories. If you are a woman and you're hurting, or you are a victim, God redeems. Oh, he redeems, and he uses your story. He uses your story for good. And I would say ultimately, if you are in that place, as a biblical woman, just submit to the Lord. Submit to the Lord. And I know that's hard, but ultimately he will bless you. He will bless you.
Yeah, he will. So, well, guys, I think that is all the time we have on this. There's so much we can talk about, but like I said, we wanted to just bring something to kind of some extra thoughts, and even just thoughts in community, because a lot of times, as you're part of a church, you're only hearing, one person, or even your growth, So we just think that, man, the wisdom of the Lord is shown in community, different voices bring it to the table. So this is hopefully something we can do semi-regularly here, and we hope you enjoyed the content. Any closing thoughts?
I think we should just close out with the verse that traditionally propelled this series, the 1 Corinthians 16.
Why don't you read that for us?
Okay,
I
so
don't actually
first-
have that on my screen.
1 Corinthians 16, verses 13 through 14. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love.
Let all you do be done in love. I love that.
All you be do.
Let all you be doing. Let all that you do be done in love.
Yeah.
But that undergirds all the previous statements. So,
Yeah.
all right, guys, thank you so much for your time. We hope you enjoyed the content, and we hope to be sending you something else soon, but in the next coming weeks. So we'll see. We'll see how well this does. But love you, church. Talk to y'all soon.
See ya.